Trump remains a bit of a riddle wrapped in an enigma. Where are the flashpoints we should worry about in 2017? And first of all, the report by the US intelligence agencies, the bits that have been made public, I mean, it does suggest that Russia really played a very strong role, actually, in the US election, quite an extraordinary role. Whether it made any difference in the voting is a matter of contention.
Well, I don't think there's much doubt that it made a difference. I certainly don't.
Well, Mr. Trump doesn't think so, is what I was trying to say.
Look, they had a very concerted, very well-directed, very successful 16 and 18-month intrusion into the Democratic Party's emails, for which I blame the Democrats. I mean, they were as sloppy. I don't know how sloppy you are, but we're all pretty sloppy with our emails. They really have themselves to blame. They left themselves completely wide open to state intrusion, and Putin's people do that sort of thing extraordinarily well. So it was very effective, and it had to have swung some votes toward Trump, but so did a lot of other things. Nobody's saying Putin is the reason that Trump is the president, but he enters with this very cloudy relationship with Putin that I think is going to be problematic.
I mean, it is extraordinary in our lifetime to have any American leader being that close to the leader of the Kremlin, particularly somebody who used to be in the KGB.
It sounds like science fiction. I mean, if 10 years ago someone would have told you a Republican candidate elected with the help of one KGB agent, I mean, it would have sounded like
yeah,
crazy.
That script will never work,
will
will it?
Never work.
No,
it's
too
just so
ridiculous.
unrealistic. But actually, we need to brace ourselves because we're entering a very, very dark year. I think that 2017, especially in Europe, with all these elections and the clear evidence that Russia has been waging a cyber warfare to influence the American elections of all countries, it's something that might really put us on alert. We've got a number of elections in Europe, and Putin has been already trying to meddle with Germany opinion public in many, many ways. He has been doing in all the former voice of pact countries. He has been doing everywhere. So we need to be aware that this is a year in which what we have taken for granted, the international law and order, the kind of force of the law, is going to be replaced by the law of force.
And it's, you know, we know that François Fillon in France is quite receptive to Russia playing a bigger role in Europe. We know that Putin is playing what could be seen as a very weak hand, but playing it very well.
Well, that is exactly what American diplomats will concede, that Russia had a weak hand, as you say, played it extraordinarily well. You remember that in December of 2015, when Russia decided to intervene militarily in Syria, there were warnings from President Barack Obama that it would be another Afghanistan, in other words, a quagmire where Russia will get bogged down. But what has happened instead is that Russia, President Putin, has had the projection of military force and forced the conclusion he wanted. I spent most of 2016, or a lot of 2016, going to one security forum after another with Western leaders say, we will not accept the changing of borders in our time by force. We will not accept that the post-1945 order will be changed. Russia went into Crimea. It still is there. Russia not only shifted the momentum on the battlefield in Syria, saved President Assad's forces from collapse on key front lines, it is now the key. So it's the key player on the battlefield. And I was in Aleppo during the last stages of the war for that important city. And then he shifted to the negotiating table. It was Russia and Turkey which negotiated the evacuation of fighters from Aleppo. It is Russia and Turkey which is now driving the new impetus for possibly a new round of talks to take place not in Geneva or Vienna or Paris, but in Astana, in the Russian orbit. It's extraordinary. Even British diplomats will concede that Vladimir Putin went from zero influence in the Middle East in 2015 to now being the major player with the military force and the political will to back it up. So much so that even Gulf states are saying, we wish our ally was President Putin.
I was going to ask you about that, Lise. You know, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and also Iran. The impact of Russia really putting its weight about and being successful. Has that changed things?
It's always been asked whether Russia and Iran see eye to eye in Syria. They don't. They have a shared interest in seeing President Assad, or at least his regime, remaining, but they have different strategic interests. Russia wants to maintain its military bases. Iran wants to maintain its corridor to Lebanon, to Hezbollah. It wants to maintain the presence of Shia forces, of which there are many forces in there. But the big question is going to be, once President Trump enters the mix, he seems to want to work with President Putin, but he also wants to undermine Iran's influence. And if you're going to work in Syria, it's hard to square that circle.
Indeed. How do you see President Trump's potential relations with Mr. Putin? Do you see that as a worry, that Britain should be concerned about that?
I think one should be alive to some of these concerns, absolutely, because I do think that there are people who have been in the Trump entourage who have said things about Putin that give me cause for concern, certainly. Though there are others in the Trump transition team who've been quite robust towards Russia. So it is an area of concern. But we should take one step back. Many of the gains that President Putin has made, which cause me concern, indeed heartache, are as a consequence of the weakness shown by President Obama. We had an opportunity to intervene in Syria in 2013. The British Parliament, much to my regret, chose not to.
And Obama said, forgive me, this past week, that was the reason we didn't do it.
Well, quite. But actually, the President of the United States could have shown a greater degree of resolution and clarity at that time. And I do think that it is... it's a great shame that in the final days of his presidency, there's been an element of displacement activity on the part of President Obama and John Kerry. They have concentrated at the United Nations on resolutions about Israeli settlements rather than accepting that they play a much bigger role in the eclipse of Western power in the Middle East and the unhappy consequences that Lisa's alluded to, with Gulf states now looking to Russia for a role. They play a bigger role and carry a heavier weight of responsibility than anything that President-elect Trump, has to have on his conscience at this moment.
How far do you buy that? Because the other way of looking at that same story is that after Afghanistan and after Iraq, Obama did not want to get involved in some kind of protracted conflict, which he thought might be...
opinion polls
the opinion polls told MPs here the same thing, too.
I think there's a consistency to the 8 years of Obama's foreign policy. It's been a bit ambiguous in Afghanistan, but he has not wanted more interventions, and I think he inherited a truly disastrous situation from the prior administration, and has spent 8 years trying to cope with it, and now it goes back the other way. It's a very confusing time for American foreign policy. 6 months ago, Obama was proud of what he'd accomplished and proud of what he'd not been dragged into, and I think that's no longer the case. They were very... I was with some U.S. diplomats the day Russia went into Syria, and they were, as Lee said, quite convinced Putin was making a disastrous strategic error, and it's paid off in spades for Putin. He's managed it beautifully, I believe.
Go ahead.
But on the other hand, I mean, if we want to be slightly more optimistic, it is true that this new international scenario does put a lot of pressure on the Europeans. It is true that the bombing of civilians by the Russians in Syria has caused all the European leaders to really think long and hard, what are we going to do if America disengages from Europe, if America decides, as Trump has said, that he doesn't want to pay any more for NATO, the share that America pays, then the Europeans, by necessity, they have to come together in order to ensure their own security.
But at the last European Council, there was no discussion of what had been happening in Syria, and no resolution to deal with what Russia had been responsible for. And it's only in the United Kingdom that there is a live debate about the need to increase defence spending. And as we discussed earlier,
no, that's not correct. I'm afraid
there's not plenty of smaller countries.
If you have been watching European Union politics, you would see there has been an acceleration in terms of common defence spending, common research, and that the fact
more spending
policy, but not more men and more material. It is the case, of course, that the Baltic states are concerned. But if you look at who is putting forces on the eastern border of NATO in order to defend, it is America, Canada, Britain. And one of the concerns that I have is that the European Union, for the reasons that we discussed right at the very beginning, is turning inward. And while there is a belief that there should be institutional change within Europe, what there isn't is the resolution in dealing with the anti-democratic forces that Putin has marshalled.
But we've come full circle in our discussion. It's interesting. We started off by saying that, Michael saying that, but how there was huge internal issues to resolve, and there are in the major European Union players. But they're going to be forced to confront the problems of their unity or the lack of it. When President Trump talks about NATO, you've got to pay your own way. What about when President Trump starts talking about let's ease the sanctions on Russia over Ukraine? The EU, particularly Angela Merkel and François Hollande, were leading the way in terms of dealing with Russia on the issue of Ukraine. These are red button issues for Europe in terms of European values, European principles. They cannot simply let them drift away.
And I expect that if Marine Le Pen doesn't win, if, as it looks like, François Fillon might have a chance, then that's going to be really the key moment in which we could see a real change in Europe, especially on defense and security issues, because France is very keen, and that will have also a strong influence on Brexit negotiations, because Europe doesn't want to let Britain
We've just got
go
one minute left.
military
I
aspects.
just wanted to ask you if we've missed what could be the really scariest story of the whole year, which is China, North Korea, South Korea, the relations there, and Donald Trump's attitude to China. I mean, we don't know what he's going to do, but that's very interesting.
And Trump's attitude toward nuclear proliferation, which so far has been, hey, it's no big problem. Does that change once he's in the Oval Office? We don't know yet. He hasn't clarified his point of view with regard to any of that.
He was very robust about North Korea, though, wasn't he? He was... I'm judging from his tweets, of course, rather than major policy statements.
Right, and I think whatever Obama told him rattled him that first day when Obama first met with Trump a day after the election. But Trump expresses a willingness for Japan and South Korea to get nuclear arms. He's going to, what he said would overturn decades of non-proliferation.
Well, on that note, Happy New Year. That's it for this week. You can comment on the programme on Twitter @Gavin, and you can engage with our guests and complain if you like. We're back next week at the same time. Make a date with Dateline London. Bye-bye.